June 11th, 1999 marked the premiere of a momentous occasion, an inspiring movement of original cartoon properties that ushered forth history for the one and only Cartoon Network. Each one marching to their own beat, the proclivity to join these forces together in one super-powered block always made for a synchronous symphony. It remains unmatched, unparalleled, uncontested today. The only event that could dare to hold a candle is the Australian version.
Hello, I'm Johnny Bravo, and I'm hosting Cartoon Fridays tonight. Little hockey puck. That's your cue. I said that's your cue. Cue that disc, dudes. Boom!
Yeah, turns out they had the exact same thing. I doubt most fans knew that. I doubt they knew that Cartoon Network had live-action shows before CN Real in Western Europe, or perhaps that the channel had its own water park deep in the heart of Thailand, or maybe even that most of its coolest crossovers stemmed from the urban jungle of Buenos Aires. There's a whole slew of content this channel is known for, internationally speaking, but there are few that didn't witness them in real time who are aware. So I figured it'd be a good time to take a look at their international activities. Especially recently, it's been easy to rag on them for certain decisions they've made, but I think knowing of their work abroad will make it easier to appreciate its domestic state. So today, we're taking a look at Cartoon Network around the world. Based on the vast knowledge I've been forced to sum up, the order of which is going to be a free-for-all of sorts. Each section is going to focus on one of 5 regions of the world, but the order of which the individual feeds come into play is a bit tricky. Not everyone has as much to talk about as others, so I'll try to give as much information as relevant, but I will not have 10 minutes of bars ready for everything. Keep in mind that while the video length might say otherwise, this is a thorough but not complete history of dealings abroad. Simply put, the brand is still rapidly changing and developing, so this could be out of date in a year or a week. Or, instantly. Moreover, there's going to be items and such that simply slip through the cracks. The scourge of globalization has made it possible for Cartoon Network to exist on every majorly habitable continent. And while there's a lot of uniformity in their branding and messages, there's still many key subtle differences between them that we have to highlight, especially within the 2010s. In making this, I wanted to place a big emphasis on the original content with respect to cultural deviations in works. A lot of content made before 2010 felt like it was in line with a more blanket level, international plan. So it's easier to tackle them as one unit first. Before we jump into the real ruckus, let's go over most, if not all, the Cartoon Network originals and co-productions made before the modern era. Fat Dog Mendoza, a surrealist cartoon based on a series of indie comics under the same name. I enjoyed my time with it, but it didn't feel like there was much cohesion to its weirdness. Cramp Twins. For as many people that have put down this series, I think this is a spiritual experience for the ages. It has to be seen to be believed. It is genuinely worth a closer look. It's like one of those magic paintings. You're not gonna see anything until you stare at it for a really, really long time. Only then will you uncover its hidden depths. But if you don't want to take the risk, man already got you covered. Yuri the Spaceman, an early CG animated set of shorts starring the aforementioned spaceman and his misadventures whilst stranded on the moon. I'm pretty sure this is partial lost media of sorts, and only a few episodes were saved after so much time. It's a pretty interesting one, just from an aesthetic standpoint alone, especially amidst a very comedically focused brand. Spaced Out, an early 2000s series involving an average family being sent to live in an artificial space colony by a greedy mega corporation. Seems like the premise that's run into the ground, but I do like the sensibilities of it. Even while being dubbed by Canadians, you can tell it has a very European state of mind. The art style is pretty articulated. The exaggerated character design and the shifting line weights make this seem like a gag strip brought to life. The writing can also be pretty biting at times, too. The Big O Part 2. Not really a Cartoon Network production, but they deserve a mention anyway. The anime premiered before the turn of the century, and it had its own episode count cut down due to low ratings. Luckily, Cartoon Network was able to step in and finance the remaining episodes planned as its cult status grew. Thus, the series is concluded under The Big O Part 2. If IGPX is a love letter, Big O is the full tribute. IGPX, essentially Cartoon Network's first anime. Co-produced with the studio behind Ghost in the Shell, it's a multi-piece franchise about mech fights and skating. If chicks dig giant robots, then this'll win over everybody else. For as iconic as it was back in the day, I found it rather understated now, which is a shame. The series proper had a lot going for it as far as I could tell. It's an animation fan's love letter to both prominent sides of the world. Santo vs. the Clones, an underrated epic about a luchador turned superhero fighting off an army of cloned cronies. Technically, it's the first original Cartoon Network series from Latin America, and it made a good first impression. It threw so much at you at once, but managed to make everything look really bold and cinematic. Harry and His Bucket Full of Dinosaurs, a typical preschool series involving exactly what the title describes, was made around the time Cartoon Network tried to muscle into the preschool market with Tickle You, which is where Harry premiered in the United States. Out of the whole block, I think this was the only one suitable to be part of an actual preschool block. Robot Boy, Cartoon Network Europe's Astro Boy parody styled after UPA-inspired cartoons. I can easily see why this series was picked up. Its visual stylings do have an impact. Don't know if I can say the same for its writing, though. Powerpuff Girls Z, the Powerpuff Girls adaptation that takes all the power out of Powerpuff. PPG's official anime, probably commissioned and definitely released when the show was already out of its prime. It's common for Cartoon Network staples to have wide-reaching appeal, especially among a Japanese audience, and Tom and Jerry is one of Western animation's hottest commodities over there. Ironically, the adaptation is noted to have changed so much that it took out much of the appeal from the original concept. Now, it's definitely what would be considered a high concept anyway. A lot of money and notable artists were put on the project, but it didn't seem to stick. It didn't even officially premiere outside of some Asian countries in Australia. I'd say it's worth checking out for the novelty of it. Just know what you're jumping into. Skatoony, an animated live-action hybrid of a game show featuring plenty of cameo appearances from familiar faces in the North American version. Ellis Mark already made a great video about his experiences with it, so go check that one out. Stormhawks, a truly unique action sci-fi serial that took high-flying adventures to a whole new level. Aside from its premise, which I will continue to keep vague, its identity was made by its prolific animation style, which was created by none other than Nerdcorp's Entertainment. Personally, I was more of a Slugterra kind of kid, but based on the airtime it got on domestic Cartoon Network, it seemed like a good time. George of the Jungle Season 1. I think many have already covered how much of a delightful absurdity this whole show was, so just go watch him. I suggest this one. This one's my favorite. In terms of an earnest recommendation, though, Season 1 was much better. Just trust me on this one. My Spy Family, Cartoon Network's first full live-action series as far as I can fathom at least. Even as a partially live-action entity, Reanimated is beat out by a 2-week margin. It's a plucky family-based sitcom following the antics of the aforementioned Spy Family. Now, based on the premise alone, you can fathom it to be a very corny series on the whole, which it is, but it can also be pretty clever at points. What can hinder it is its usage of the perennially annoying laugh track. Yeah, for real. Given how many spy concepts kids' TV has given life to in the 2000s, this one is rather unexceptional. However, as a uniquely weird Cartoon Network entity, I'd actually recommend giving it a watch. It's not among their best, but it's definitely worth a look. The Mr. Men Show, a demure but colorful adaptation of the famous books. They utilized a segment format to bring the characters to life. One of the producers and major personalities from the Teen Titans Go crew was actually a production designer here, which gives the show a bright atmosphere. It's a strong adaptation, but there's not much else to say about it. Chopsaki Chooks, a unique series coined during CN's infamous Dark Age. Comparatively, it probably is one of the better cartoons on at the time, but it does feel a bit incomplete. I know that title sounds like a bit vaguely racist, but it's just a totally radical, tubular way of calling the protagonist martial arts fighting avian. This is another series where style reigns supreme, as the typical plot seems to be in the Monster of the Week style without much variation. As far as cartoons that parody 70s action elements, I'd recommend the French animated Funky Cops instead. Though, if you're interested in it, Pan did a solid deconstruction of Chopsaki that you've probably already seen. Starioki, an originally Finnish game show heavily revolving around karaoke. Technically, this one was licensed out to Cartoon Network Europe as a format, but the UK version of the show is still kind of an original anyway. You haven't seen anything like it elsewhere, have you? Pink Panther and Pals, a modern adaptation of the ubiquitous 60s cartoon character, in addition to a side feature from the Ant and Anteater duo. It's a pretty standard cartoon, there's not much else to it. Hero 108, a multinational series based on ancient Chinese lore. The art style is pretty eye-catching, especially for 2010, but I couldn't tell you how this series panned out. Luckily, I do know someone that could tip you off to its quality. Going forward, there will be plenty more original properties to shine a spotlight on, but the footprints left in their individual cultures and industries are decidedly more dramatic and a prime reason to even discuss them in the first place. But initially, we're going to start off small. Really, really small. I'm starting off with Canada because there's not much to talk about.
From coast to coast, all of Canada is getting checked. Cartoon Network is here. A brand new channel just for you with amazing new shows.
Cartoon Network and Adult Swim Canada launched on July 4th, 2012 after the successful inheritance of a CRTC license by Teletoon Canada, a joint operation of Astral Media and Chorus Entertainment at the time of acquisition. Yes, I said Teletoon, the big cheese up north responsible for stuff like this, and this. What do they have to do with any of this? Well, don't worry, I will set the scene. You see, as you'll soon come to find out, most of the Cartoon Networks around the world were not launched by Cartoon Network themselves. Yeah, what actually happens is that the company will usually lend their brand name, programs, and branding assets to a regional feed that is maintained by a bigger sister entity. In Cartoon Network's case, it might be Turner Regional or Warner Brothers or even TCM. In certain specific cases that we'll come to address later, there will be some timeshares that are mainly just blocks on other channels. In this instance, not only did Cartoon Network not establish their own means to launch such an endeavor by themselves, but there arguably wasn't a need for it in the first place, since even long before the channel's launch, Teletoon would air Cartoon Network originals on their own channel. After all, they've been considered to be the unofficial but original Canadian Cartoon Network since launch, really. But that's perhaps a sticking point more than it is a positive. The channel itself seems like little more than a centralized hub for the original programming and then some. A lot of the promotional material was upcycled from the American branch following a similar run of branding errors and campaigns. Quite a few of the bumpers from the original Check It era were re-edited to hit a 10-second threshold rather than a 5-second one, which leads to awkward bumps like this. The original promos that aired were not too much unlike the US ads. For some of them, they utilized the current Teletoon announcer to solidify this brand takeover. The official channel's arrival also ushered in the age of Adult Swim Canada, which was cool beans because it also invalidated the existence of Teletoon at Night outside of a few exclusive programs. As of 2019, this paved the way for the shutdown of Teletoon at Night and the subsequent launch of a 24-hour Adult Swim channel. It was an interesting revolutionary change going forward, one perhaps that many have been hyping up for ages, and this outfit also reuses a lot of assets and materials, but it arguably retains more of a distinctive feeling to it. I would also partially attribute this channel's arrival to the unfortunate end of Teletoon Retro, which would most be simply known to you as Canadian Boomerang that stuck to its mission statement. No, there's no replacement Boomerang to take its spot. They were considered one and the same. Think of them like fraternal twins. Outside of a slightly more balanced schedule, there's practically nothing to it. It's just another asset to chuck into the unending pile of course entertainment properties up there. I'm sure even with this in mind, we're glad to have it there. Who else would we use it as an example for our Cartoon Network scheduling rants? Whew. 1 down, 4 to go. Anyway, on to the real action.
There's all kinds of quizzes, videos, games, and activities.
Are you kidding me?
This is amazing! Play along at cartoonnetwork.co.uk superfans.
Cartoon Network Europe is arguably the epicenter of their international movement. This region essentially originated in most of the current branches, and while they continue to be incredibly independent groupings in their own right, Cartoon Network's influence began and ended here. But how did it all start? In 1993, a joint timeshare between the Cartoon Network and TCM launched across Europe as a way to expand upon the brands abroad. As part of what would be considered a pan-European feed, it mainly utilized one native English track, and included an additional 5 audio tracks that supplemented programming in other countries. Viewers could only really partake in the European feed if they spoke Spanish, Swedish, Danish, French, Italian, or Norwegian. Several other feeds would split off into more specific subdivisions or independent feeds to accommodate the growing role in the sector. Finally, in 1999, a native British feed split off into its own thing, solidifying the European chorus of Cartoon Network channels. Ever since then, new feeds would pop up, assimilate, or close down with varying intensity, with the main channels being more or less established. With notable offshoots like Cartoon Network Spain being unexpectedly killed off for a programming block and a few other shifts, the current lineup is a full representation of what the channel would have to offer. Speaking of which, we have to expand upon exactly what that would entail. Part of what delayed this from coming out was the extent of which I had to comb through all the original content. It's not only the amount of cartoons that made it a full order, but the miniseries, shorts, and serialized internet content made. Unlike the lack of centralized presence here, there's a dominant glut of YouTube cuts to go through just for Europe alone. Their content strategy was quite ambitious, and while not always understandable in execution, the motivation was always where it needed to be. Using the UK YouTube channel as a template, their footprint is long and expansive. Spanning back as far as 2009 or so, this branch was popping old cartoon clips into the algorithm and making a tidy profit from it. A lot of original promos and content representing the new additions would pepper the output. Just as we had our own original promotional materials made, the UK has been packing its own heat. There's always been a steady diet of ads and cross-promotions to be found through their European platforms, but for their most popular work, they got to showcase some ambitious marketing projects at play. Powerpuff Girls got a healthy glut of attention through brand deals and collabs. A highlight would be its feature during London Fashion Week. Adventure Time received a mall tour featuring an interactive exhibit. We haven't gotten to touch upon its game show yet, but beyond that, most of Europe does have a strong following in mind for Ben 10 and his related products. There's typically a bit of a chronological drift in subject. Each show is likely going to take up space at least a year or two later than they premiered in the States. Digging through the channels, you soon realize that Cartoon Network's online presence is practically its own feed. You can see the natural shift in programming just by scrolling for a minute. Over here, it's roughly 80% of the same content. Even some of the acquisitions carry over via multinational deal. Animation takes forever, but with the magic of integrated marketing, they've cemented a few more popular shows as pseudo-mascots for the whole shebang. From 2010 onward, there are 5 shows that you'll never lose track of in Cartoon Network's branding anywhere in the world. Ben 10, The Powerpuff Girls, Adventure Time, We Bare Bears, and The Amazing World of Gumball. Certain regions will have certain more extreme tastes, but you will never not find at least one of these properties as part of a regional and national makeup. It heavily influences what and how IPs are promoted. Obviously, the Bears will get more attention in Japan than Ben 10 would today, though he would circumstantially appeal heavily in the Middle East and Latin America, and Gumball seems to smash all those markets without even trying. To this end, it's important to establish how Cartoon Network abroad mastered the art of live entertainment. Every year there was a pop-up event or festival or even game show, of course, to publicly engage its audience. Long-standing investments like amusement parks or shops are more common in other regions, as we'll learn today, but the sheer abundance of special events kept the audiences tethered to their brand. They may not have had the Cartoon Network Hotel, and still known as it now, but hey, you can never say that we got to have a Ben 10 game show, can you?
The toughest game show on earth is coming to Cartoon Network.
Its more memorable experiments stem not from a whole reinvention of the wheel, but rather a way to decorate it in a distinctly regional fashion. More notably, it appeared that less specific regional imports were more likely to flop. The UK's iteration of Toonami only lasted a few years before its properties were folded into the pre-existing time-shift channel Cartoon Network 2. Ambitiously bolstered by a new action-focused venture, CNX, the demand for content in the young adult sphere had prompted the change, but it quickly fizzled out because of the branch's inability to keep up. In comparison, its more flagrantly flavored old-school Friday night block, Cartoon AKA, had a legacy spanning wider than perhaps expected. You probably recognize it for the Black Dexter recolor, but overseas it was an avenue to introduce the audience to a lineup more akin to the Cartoon Network of yesteryear. Classic cartoons were subjected to wacky remixes and non-sequitur edits, while a mixed slate got airtime. There's scant footage that survived the time, but the fact that we even get to refer back to it speaks to its oddly spontaneous volatility.
All put in the blender and pureed until the whole thing is mixed up nice and stupid, aka Cartoon Network.
In addition, the lighter fare parallel to Cartoon Network seems to have made a pronounced impact on audiences in the mainland and abroad. Boomerang's strong returns in the UK did prompt a less standardized approach to programming. It became a home to old cartoons of homes outside of the Turner legacy. One of its original fringe offerings was a small domino with the help of a successful block on Cartoon Network 2, helped kick off one of the first successful preschool options in the library, Cartoonito. For over a decade, this offshoot had been serving audiences throughout the Europe, Middle East, and Africa super-region by offering content for younger folks that would seldom be seen elsewhere in the CN family. Mainly trafficking in older content from the library and specialized acquired shows, its rapid takeoff in the United Kingdom led to expansions in Western Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia and Africa. While perhaps not as varied as Boomerang in scope, it was an early success for the brand. Cartoon Network's expansion in certain parts of the world is pertinent to retelling its history, so you'll learn more about this one later on. There are plenty of microcosms like that strung up around the region. It probably seems like a ridiculous notion for the higher-ups to run with, but their competitive streak put them ahead of other titanic challengers in the kids' TV game, whether domestic or imported. In particular, the rise of the internet age arguably colored a lot of business decisions, slowly leaking into the programming. In 2003, a group of musicians, designers, and producers were assembled to reverse engineer an opportunity to keep more kids watching through the ad breaks with something fun, fresh, and innovative. The end result was cosmically different for the time. Enter the V-Girls, a virtual group born out of an intergalactic exile. Controlling the inside of a DDR console, they were sent to Earth for not relinquishing their power to participate in, what I hear, dance farms or something? It was a striking flash fusion for the time. As far as I can tell, the project was built up in about a year or so. With it came with a music video, separate miniseries, online cross-promotion, a UK chart-topping single, a contest, and even a full-on interview. I wouldn't say the product was poorly constructed or anything, but the ethos this was allowed to expand in feels off. Just like this dancing. Part of why this environment exists is because, while more socially responsible with its advertising philosophy, Europe ultimately has a lot more freedom to reinvent with it than we did. Whether it be through media watchdogs or helicopter lawmakers, there would never be a time where children's entertainment eked back into the dark ages of the 50s, where advertisers actively made the products the production. Outside of all the general ads that might pop up on the channel, plenty of it was made of sponsored content made in collaboration with other companies. In one series, we got to see breakfast food be transformed into animated overlords. Now you can see them everywhere. As innocuous as their shtick seemed then, it wasn't always quite this way. See, in the early 2000s, the UK government actually started paying closer attention to childhood obesity and the health crisis. As much as its rise was due to social and environmental factors, they also shifted the focus towards advertising's role in things. If everyone else is trying their best to combat it, what does it say that adverts get a free pass? There was also a heavy question of offloading responsibility and accountability on the Cartoon Network, primarily due to their junk food advertising in excess. In late 2004, the government released a comprehensive bill draft that took aim at many sources of inequality and disparity in health and taking steps to reverse certain negative trends. From the bits I've skimmed, it was a pretty neutral piece, like, it made its case with conviction, but it didn't call anyone out by name when they delved into the possible restriction of ads. Despite this, it seemed like Turner got a little defensive, which compelled them to create the Elfie Food miniseries. Their logic was quite literally, if we advertise this healthy food along the junk food, then you should be allowed to do more of that junk food, innit? I'm sorry, that was terrible. It took a year and a half, £250,000, and help from a few charities, but they expertly crafted the apex of corporate pandering.
All your powers will be needed to go in search of more Elfie food. This map will guide you to secret Elfie food locations. Go with haste, but be very careful.
They aired this every hour, on the hour, during peak times between 3 networks, for 1 week. It's hilariously meager, as it is insultingly concise. It almost deserves its own video. Almost. I reckon they wouldn't go through the same trouble again. Not only because advertising has changed so much since then, but this likely had no impact on their goal. But because the network would leverage much more down-to-earth and less expensive means to peddle their product. Most of what the European channels are known for are their penchant to harness the power of live-action mascots. In a cosmic sort of way, I guess it makes sense. I mean, when your entire network is populated by colorful cartoon characters, you gotta make your ultimate representatives stand out in some type of way. So more often than not, the channel will find older kids and young adults to fill this role. The UK used a lot of YouTubers and general personalities to host shows and miniseries online. They came up with a whole new venture just for quarantine.
Introducing Cartoon Network's band practice,
The most prolific and wide-reaching of these shows would have to be these Toonie Tube segments, wherein a young felt-covered gamer talks about his favorite Cartoon Network programming. Russia had something a bit similar with a multimedia game show, which I really liked it for its style. Bumper tracks aside, these feeds also carried over a few initiatives and ideas from the American branch. Cartoon Network Anything was a short-lived multi-platform designation that took on another life overseas. Our long-standing anti-bullying campaign morphed into the Cartoon Network Buddy Network program, complete with a new aesthetic. Of course, what would the channel be without some type of contest or event? So the extent of which original online content was truly original is a bit nebulous, but nestled in pockets of the collective channel's histories does lie a few brief points of note. Back when it was still alive, over-the-air, Cartoon Network Spain commissioned the short-form comedy Monetes del Espacio, a superior cartoon about monkeys in orbit. In Italy, management teamed up with an internet animator to form a series of shorts under the Chowtoon Network label. You probably wouldn't understand them, but trust me, they're pretty funny. Pretty much in every part of the world except for ours, the Ben 10 Challenge game show was popping off and still gaining ground after years and years. As for the television feeds themselves, they're pretty much straightforward ports of the original releases. Since the whole continent's network of channels was born out of one centralized zone, it's still fairly common to see ideas and branding errors consolidated or co-opted. Though it's important to note that this doesn't exclude Europe at large from having unique elements. Even during those early years, that pan-Euro feed was able to switch up the branding a little bit and distinguish itself mostly without dialogue. One of the most prominent would be the mid-2000s Aero theming that fit in place of our nudes era. CN City dominated concurrently with new bumpers contributing to the lore that were produced by a pair of Madridian studios, Trecefalo and Incapace. The latter studio also produced the Casillas era of Eurocyan, a concept the American branch would take inspiration from itself. Plenty of original content was able to be produced for that European audience, but most of them were co-productions up to a certain point. By the time Robot Boy crashed into the channel, the brand started to take more serious steps forward to remain competitive. In 2007, Cartoon Network Studios Europe was founded and made it possible for the brand to not only expand their reach abroad, but also expand their creative potential. Tapping into Western Europe for more original animated content was a long overdue idea, especially in the midst of how much Britain or France was involved with their previous co-productions. In 13 years' time, we haven't gotten much tangible result from the investment. Surely they do more behind the scenes, but their scourge of developed pilots and concepts has only net a couple developed projects, most prolific of which being The Amazing World of Gumball, a series that broadcasts its mission to pass off a bunch of Britons LARPing as ugly Americans so well that most Europeans don't even know that they made the show. The studio's output weighs more heavily with its glut of pilots rather than greenlit series, but there's one that came directly from the studio's strong roots in comedy that did distinguish itself quite a bit. The Heroic Quest of the Valiant Prince Ivanhoe is a Danish-British co-production from the ancient year of 2017. It's a play on the Walter Scott novel based on English nobility, with the presence surrounding the aforementioned Maine and his loyal squire as they travel to acquire a great treasure from a wayward king. The art style will definitely opine an offhanded comparison, but truthfully, it's probably quite intentional. Indeed, two artists that were a Gumball alum created the concept, which an original executive producing, also writing for the project as well. It's a comedic romp and a cynical one at that, but considering how rounded out the design is, you might take it as a sign of how its comedy shows. It also utilizes great multimedia execution and makes it look effortless. Even as evidence of its originator's massive footprint, it's still a perfect short series for Cartoon Network in its own right and a personal favorite of mine. It took a really long time, but as it turns out, the concept snagged a full seasonal order over the summer. The first 10 episodes are up on YouTube, and as far as I can tell, they are not region locked. We might not see it hit stateside, but at least it'll get its day. Eventually. Now, it took so long for me to finish scripting this that another original had premiered out of Europe, being teased all the way back from 2018. We now have the sci-fi slice-of-life serial Elliot from Earth. Based on an idea supplied by a former Gumball writer, the series follows 3 Earthen refugees discovering alien civilization and working to get back home. In stark contrast to Ivanhoe, the show takes a more laid-back approach to its humor and character setting. It's less loud and in a way Olaf from Frozen is. It allows you to absorb what's going on rather than throw mile-a-minute comedic setups around. To that end, it's strictly relegated to 2D environments, but the depth of ambiance and general scope of said environments really ties things together. If these shots pique your interest, I'd recommend giving this review a peek. As was current for the time, Man and I got into the nitty-gritty of what truly makes it Elliot from Earth. It's structured like a longer miniseries, but it's less of a time sink to invest in while giving you more to invest in all the same. By the time this was released, I'm sure we'll be waiting for Chapter 3 to come out, and no word on when it'll touch down on HBO Max, if ever, but the series is on Amazon Prime if you're willing to buy it. The other pick is a bit farther to the east, but still a property near and dear to this region, hailing from an unlikely producer and a Turkish animator based in a built-up studio in Istanbul. No doubt that it is quite nerve-wracking to produce an episodic comedy for a big national producer, but from the outset, I think this series came out on top with the lion's share of profit. From what I've seen, Kral Shakir is basically another urban slice-of-life property surrounding a dynamic group of characters. I wouldn't say my Turkish is the best, but it seems like a funny show. Sure, the animation and art design is a bit more simplistic than what you're probably used to, but genuinely, I think it makes it part of the charm. The show is more authentic and down-to-earth to folks, which it more keenly identifies. Not all city slickers are made equal, but there are commonalities in humor and styling that typically unite the pack. More authentically, it seems like it gained an audience without the assistance of major marketing money put into it, even with Cartoon Network's backing. Over time, it steadily climbed the ranks to eventually cop its own theatrical movie in 2018. It's probably not something as easily relatable to us, but its achievements are very admirable. After all, you can't say Robot Boy got this far, can ya? These three are pretty healthy entries into the Cartoon Network family. The former two especially are slow burn but ultimately successful test runs of that family tree model that the US studio loves to utilize. Assuming they'd be able to ramp up production, they could have a healthy circuit going on. I noticed that pre-Gumball, the varying pilots and shorts made under the European branch seemed more loose in visual identity. It had the type of flair that could make it stand out. In a weird timeline where Vern on Vacation or Pinky Malinky got the green light from Cartoon Network themselves, I could see either being notable additions to the lineup. As of right now, it feels easier to see simplistic similarities or blurred lines from their main output, and while not bad in its own right, the Eurocon, by comparison, was a nice change of pace. Even at its most crude, it felt a bit more lively, expressive, or even cartoony. If there was a synergy between such sides, it'd bring Cartoon Network back to its Renaissance days easily. So generally, while it continues to be a big offshoot for Cartoon Network, it doesn't lend much in the way of full circulation for original animated content. The UK and France got a head start with their early history of originals and co-productions, but the rest of the continent never seemed to match that same speed for several reasons. Each European branch is good at connecting with local ambassadors and event spaces, but aside from the occasional short bumper, none of the channels as part of such designation really have a strong cultural identity. Their feeds are definitely localized and customized to a degree, but as we go forth, there will be some other regions that it creatively cannot hold a candle to. It's funny because Cartoon Network's brand has always been laid in its lack of conformity and polish, but its visual presentation, Check It era onward, has made that much harder to distinguish. Cartoon Network Europe's bread and butter seems to fall under distribution rather than full-out production. No matter where they came from, they've been much better at bringing outsiders into the Cartoon Network family than anything else. It's the coordination that not only helps keep the other branches supplied with fresh content, but it also incentivizes them to experiment more on their own to manufacture their own hits. After all, the only thing better than another Gumball would be a fully homegrown Gumball. So shifting gears, expect to catch more of these domestic animations on the flip side, because the world of content is basically wide open to whoever will claim it.
The toughest game show on earth is coming to Cartoon Network.
Ben 10 Ultimate Challenge, only on Cartoon Network.
Any part of the world, the one you'd hear about the least in the context of animation is going to be Africa. The reason why I put it front and center right after Europe was to test your expectations. Surely you were not anticipating it so soon. If I told you that Cartoon Network Africa is coming out with more banger original premises, you probably would not believe me. Rest assured, there's a lot of cool stuff to discover in this part of the globe. This branch's roots lie in the original 1993 Pan-European feed's launch, which became a split-off in '99 to become the first native African feed, otherwise known as Cartoon Network HQ. For the longest time, the feed was also broadcast in the Greater Middle East without any specialization for the region. In 2010, Cartoon Network Arabic was launched exclusively for the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa. 6 years later, the African feed was phased out over there in favor of a specialized feed under that MENA handle. Subsequently, the HQ handle was dropped in favor of the regular African naming scheme, which roughly speaking brings us up to today. All three now coexist peacefully, and they have their own rules, schedules, and censorship guidelines. Utilizes a lot of the European designs, though occasionally we'll see some fresh content to fill out the breaks. A lot of mainstays, like Ben 10 and Powerpuff Girls, get a substantial amount of airtime and attention, but a lot of syndicated content gets its fill too. This includes any series or promotions based on past IPs, especially the aforementioned two. Classic characters like Tom and Jerry, or acquired casts like Augie and the Cockroaches gain a lot of traction in the Middle East especially. In live events and shows, you'll see the cat and mouse duo as often as you might encounter Ben 10. Though speaking of the latter, his made-for-TV movie, Ben 10 vs. the Universe, was actually released in theaters in those regions. Probably not terribly advisable at the moment, but if that doesn't speak to the fandom hype, I don't know what does. Now, I wager that Africa's animation industry is not really considered competitive yet. In the last decade or two, it's made incredible strides in local and international markets, but it has yet to have its watershed moment. There's certainly more of a demand for animated content expressed, as there is more stability to tackle the training and infrastructure required to produce it. So Cartoon Network integrated a mission to get more local programming integrated into their direct consumer messaging. Hailing from Jordan and the United Arab Emirates, used their airtime to spit bars about their own cultures. A lot of imports are made available to Europe and Asia simultaneously, so most don't seem to cop a large audience. Occasionally an item will stick out, like I, Elvis Heriboldi, an odd adaptation of an Italian graphic novel series. Purely circumstantial observation, but it seems like Africa gave it an inordinate amount of attention. And they weren't hawking relatable imports, they were expanding Cartoon Network's reach across borders. Around the continent, the brand's MO was to keep such a momentum flowing, whether for beloved classics or explosive new projects. Part of how they did this was through more direct brand initiatives and things. You got your standard events and stage show tours, but the region was also keen on utilizing more expansive local talent. In keeping with the general fanaticism found around the EMEA region, the Powerpuff Girls were party to numerous African promotions and events. One of their most ambitious was the eponymous Powerpuff Girl Awards, an event celebrating some of the continent's youngest innovators in science, tech, engineering, arts, and math. Some of you might know of the Powerpuff promotional materials that turned the reboot's theme into a rap. That's gotten around quite a bit, but I doubt you've seen all the reactions said artist has participated in.
Whoa! Angry man! Toxic.
Yeah, good times. And more engaging affairs, Cartoon Network actually dabbled in more long-form live content. Ben 10 Ultimate Challenge aside, they actually created another live-action series of which to draw from. Kicked off in 2016, Pop-Up Party is a mobile dancing competition of all things adorned in the current Cartoon Network color scheme. Itself is an unconventional entry for sure, but it has a genuine energy behind it that something like the CN Real slate couldn't quite capture. They weren't the worst shows to match, but the faux edgy content more or less made the block the Mid-Olympics Grand Prix. Another entry would be the more comedic romp Cartoon Network to the Rescue, wherein a one-man show learns to navigate life lessons and everyday problems with the power of God and animation on his side. It's a more ingenious, albeit low-concept avenue to engender some brand loyalty into its viewers. It's not about the characters, but the adventure we share along the way. On top of that, the channel came up with an event to launch a pop-up channel in tribute of all the action-packed superhero series in the Turner Library called Superhero HQ. Skits, bumpers, and flashy CG graphics wrapped around a slate of DC programming for a brief period of time. Despite the general theming and attitude, these series were obviously more reliant on the human factor of the channel. Even if these are not exactly the most on-brand content to produce, I imagine adding a personalized touch to such a big overseas import was an important touch for this region especially. As we've discussed previously, these power moves were just the tip of the iceberg. The conglomerate seemed to have bigger goals in mind. See, since Cartoon Network's African and Middle Eastern feeds had yet to make a personalized impact on the market, that was the next step. The Imagination Studios initiative was produced by Turner Europe to teach the Cartoon Network audience about the shows they watch and encourage them to make some of their own. In the summer of 2017, Africa took that second bit and really expanded upon it with a contest. Kids from around all regions were tasked with making and submitting a cartoon concept, and the winners would have theirs made into a full short and aired across the feed. Similar projects were launched in Russia and Southeast Asia, but this one was by far the most ambitious and mutually beneficial. Not only do you get to make a few kids' dreams come true, but you could give the underdog studios a paid opportunity to exhibit their skills. It was a good test run, but considering its success, it was time to hit the big league. So next summer, they replicated the result for future industry personnel with the Creative Lab Initiative. All the grown-ups around were allowed to submit a brief comedic concept that, quote-unquote, fell in line with Cartoon Network's other programming. From the 10 ideas shortlisted, the artists would get to pitch to a team. Out of the 3 finalists picked, they'd be optioned for a pilot to release next year. These, along with other projects, were finally exhibited in 2020 during their Shesha Fest event, wherein really was Africa's time to shine. Admittedly, even with the brief runtime and the comedic requirement, the 3 shorts picked seem to be pretty diverse aesthetically. I'd go over them, but they don't even have a complete collective footprint online. From the little I've seen, they do have the written flair to really impress. Plus, at the center of all the stories, we had characters that probably resonated culturally just how they were, which is always a plus, of course. I initially followed this saga through Animation Magazine's coverage of it, the second article following up on the issue outlining not only the results of this endeavor, but rounded off a whole slew of other initiatives and projects Cartoon Network worked on in the year within. The Powerpuff promotions, including the addition of the PPG Award ceremony, a special localization of Toonie Tube, a summer beach tour, multiple distribution agreements across the continent, a plan to bring Ben 10 to public television and dub it in a few languages, and so on. It was clear to me that these choices were not only made to score a quick cash grab, but this side of the company was really trying to widen their footprint. By then they'd started to become a chart topper in Africa again, but they were still hauling ass to reach as many kids and eliminate social barriers. Which is fascinating to see, but at the same time Cartoon Network's not about exclusivity, philosophically speaking. It's a high-risk, high-reward strategy that seems to be winning out as of now. The pilots premiered during Shesha apparently drew in so many that it beat out mainstays on the schedule, which is incredible. More likely than not, they'll be greenlit for more content, or the creators will have some kind of deal with someone out there. So generally, while it performs best as a mix of old and new favorites, Cartoon Network in Africa is working towards building up their own local content repositories, which is not only having an impact on Turner's dealings, but the local industries they're developing. Hotspots like South Africa might become an international animation hub in a couple of years. It's these little moves today that will have a powerful ripple effect tomorrow, which is an excellent segue into the next region.
The world of Cartoon Network is coming to Singapore with the first ever Animate Your Life Festival!
Initially, I had planned these regions in categories more appropriate to their geographical grouping, but upon closer inspection, it made more sense to give higher priority to their regions economically speaking. This region's offerings might codify why. Cartoon Network Asia Pacific not only lumps most of the Asian feeds together, but also Australia and New Zealand too. They share a lot of initiatives and business deals, as their grouping makes it easier for all of them to receive acquisitions or properties given to one branch. Its origins lie closely with the US feed, but recent deviations have probably made the brand's most prolific regional spin-off abroad yet. Asia Pacific's origins lie in the timeshare Pan-Asian feed established in late 1994. Soon thereafter, Australia and New Zealand copped their own feeds. As far as I can tell, it was primarily served with an English track, but they may have changed with the addition of country-specific feeds added throughout the 90s in places like Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines. While not always following close behind its predecessors, bigger markets cropped up through feeds like ones based in South Korea and India. By the early 2000s, the whole region's network of platforms were a well-oiled machine that managed to run the gamut in a competitive field in a growth of rapid development for local animation. Cartoon Network chronology here is a bit more splintered, as the brand was split between varying cultures and languages and such. There's different regions within the grouping that have their own feeds to acknowledge, like Southeast Asia, Oceania, and territories off the East Coast. Stylistically speaking, I'd say that for the most part, these collective feeds took the then current Cartoon Network aesthetic and added on to them. Whenever they had custom bumpers made within the designated era or created an interim design, it's always a plus to the existing period of the time. I believe they're to be credited with this newer wave design that eclipsed the rest of the late 2000s. Anytime you see their work in a modern context, it makes for so many new, fun features. Special mention goes to the fabulously fluid Japanese bumpers from the early days of the channel. It managed to bridge the gap between new and old content in a way CN City couldn't really crack. But you didn't hear that from me. It made for such a cozy atmosphere. You've probably also seen a bumper or two for a new block once Americans discovered their existence and opined voraciously that Asia would finally make anime real.
Cartoon!
They did not. But the ideas they came up with were fun enough. I'll give them this. At worst, their original content comes off as a bit generic. At best, they always do right by the multifaceted audiences they court by creating fun, visually striking, and stylistically on point for a world as colorful as Cartoon Network's. This region has a habit of drawing from everywhere to bring in new talent. Usually well-established studios are making deals left and right with Turner Asia Pacific to make this short series and that long-form content, but would end up getting syndicated online and TV to Europe and Africa, because why not? It's an eternal battle for the ages, but not one without its standard bearers. This title follows its namesake, a tiny orange mutated blob creature, quite closely. Constantly on the run from these two scientists, deftly in hot pursuit, our main protagonist traffics in slapstick shenanigans and classic cartoon hijinks. It didn't reinvent the wheel or anything, but it's simple fun. It started off as 15-second vignettes, turned into 2-minute adventures, which turned into 5-minute sagas, each one released with progressively sharper comedic timing and design work. Having stumbled across it ages ago, I've been waiting for a chance to gush about it. But having the floor now, I'm not sure how to describe it really. I guess it's the mark of true comedic gold. It's so visually driven. It literally has to be seen to be believed. It can be as wholesome as it is funny. This is one of many originals, co-productions, and acquisitions collected locally from all around India. Much like Africa's mission, several countries have been able to court an audience by serving up content that reflects their environments and culture. India in particular seems to be acing the local initiative quite well, which has been assisted by quite serendipitously helpful timing. You see, throughout the late 90s and 2000s, the country's been evolving their independent animation industry at a breakneck pace. This meant not only being able to keep up with service loads from overseas, but also being able to put out a glut of domestic content. You might know their original work as far as stuff like Specialized Bumpers or Johnny Goes to Bollywood, but this has become a rich landscape for content creation. From adaptations to original ideas, they've managed to get a substantial foothold in international markets, which puts them in a unique position to give platforms like Cartoon Network a much more local flavor. This one country is party to literally dozens in their catalog, but for now we can run over a Cliff Notes version of their accomplishments. The homemade series they've chosen to air over the years is a cause for raucous applause. Some of these are left over from the pre-modern era, but most of these aren't fully identifiable as just shows Cartoon Network aired or shows they had a hand in producing. This extensive list is including, but not limited to, Amar Chitra Chakra, Akbar and Birbal, The Adventures of Chota Birbal, The Adventures of Tenali Raman, Chakra the Invincible, the 2013 film and the 2018 series, Banbach R. Budbach, Crime Time, Jungle Tales, Krishna and its movies, Krishna Balram and its movies, Ninja Nantu, Tic Tac Tale, and Supandi Supandi. There are also some movies thrown in there, but I didn't include all of them. A few of these also share a home on local sister network Pogo, which was a later stage avenue to offer up similar programming. Pretty recently, they'd premiered an animated adaptation based on an uber-popular action comedy movie franchise titled Da Bang. These and plenty other local properties were aired or partially aided by Cartoon Network in their respective fields. Practically everyone gets an opportunity to shine, even the regions you least expect. The few times you hear about Australian animation, it's not usually in positive context. I think prior to Bluey, the main series that were highlights of theirs would probably be like Pixel Pinky and Shizao, and perhaps the Koala Brothers if you were outside for it. Despite that, the few projects animated under Cartoon Network's watch have really stood out. In 2016, the Lasso and Comet pilot became the only international project helmed under their official shorts program. It's a really exciting watch that creates stylistic diversity even while being unintentionally reminiscent of plenty of other Cartoon Network originals. The Oceanic regions also found success with original content with a more experimental track. Its pair of concepts, Monster Beach and Exchange Student Zero, were initially greenlit as TV films, but were copying series greenlights after immense success. They're both fantastically adventurous concepts that are indicative of true potential. On a smaller scale, the interstitial series Bill and Tony was a fantastic co-production for its dynamic humor and more down-to-earth style. Despite the healthy market for regional productions and localized branding, there's also a sizable diversity for acquired content as well. Back in the day, Cartoon Network stateside used to be overrun with syndicated, mostly Canadian properties. With a big enough schedule to fill up, the imported cartoons helped to fill out and attract some newer eyes. A lot of them managed to fit the channel's MO so well that they were considered synonymous with the channel. There were likely still a disturbing amount of people who think Johnny Test was created by Cartoon Network themselves. But can you blame them? Yes.
Only on
Nowadays, it's unlikely you find one of those unless it came from its big brothers at DC, Warner Brothers, or Boomerang. It would not apply to its international sectors. Cartoon Network runs the gamut as a generalized children's brand around the world. Though many were able to stick close to the original branding of the early 2010s, later branding packages kind of opened the door for more wild experimentation. While they're not exactly evocative of what comes to mind when you think of Cartoon Network fare, they're probably just as important to the modern feeds as Johnny Test was back in the day. I choose to discuss all this now because the APAC region has the widest variety of acquired fare. The ideas and styles they choose to take on are a fascinating change-up from what we normally serve up. Stuff like The Journey of Long, Snack World, Running Man, and Pony Life of all things. Short series like Beat Monsters are considered original productions of sorts, while the HBO Max Looney Tunes cartoons are native to the channel and regularly air. The region also airs plenty of these in and outside special blocks and such, akin to the Cartoon Fridays callback they made earlier. Certain feeds can afford to make different choices. The Japanese and South Korean feeds tend to bring in more anime into their slates, and in contrast, a lot of acquired content for the APAC feeds typically come from those two countries. Mention, of course, should go to the Aussie brand. They were an early adopter of the presentation, so they got to experiment in ways most often couldn't. Like I mentioned earlier, a few markets also got to host the CCF lineup, including Australia and Japan. It seems like the former was able to use more to their benefit, being able to utilize the true blue voices of the cartoons for possible new material. Perhaps for similar reasons for CN's early European escapades, the ad markets over here have made ample room for Cartoon Network properties to have the floor. Early into the Check-It era's time down under, they were doing full collaborations to coincide with the rebrand and such.
Out now, it's Geronimo One Kiss, the debut album featuring the Cartoon Network theme song, It's a Fun Thing!
Part of what makes Asia Pacific so notable is their ability to assemble and mobilize the wildest brand experiences. In areas where Nick and Disney were able to capitalize so early on, where specialties Cartoon Network were able to replicate successfully. They definitely got pushed out of many opportunities stateside before they could even really begin. But as they've demonstrated, that didn't mean that they were always down for the count. I know many of us have been eyeing that hotel they opened up in the worst place at the worst time, and even Nick Hotel vibes aside, I'ma keep it real. The concept of this piddling little shit launching in the middle of this wormhole in the country after 20 years? That's some limp dick shit. Alright, Asia Pacific come out of the gate with a whole different energy. Alright, you'll ask for some pop-up attractions, they will give you the whole ass section. For 1 or 2 pop-up attractions, they'll give you a whole freaking circus, bro. Alright, not good enough for your sensibilities? I get it. Alright, fine. Here, have a water park. You know what? Not good enough? You know what? Okay, take the whole theme park. Alright. You know what? Still, you know what? I totally get it. Here, have a whole ass cruise experience for you. Now, of course, you'd be asking as to the legitimacy of such extreme ventures. I mean, Nick Hotel fizzled out because it couldn't keep up with the changes of its source material. All these have been thrown around or finished sometime in the last 5 or 6 years, and even older properties like Adventure Time and Gumball are still plastering promotional materials in the East. I think there's been a much better retention of brand awareness and a bigger willingness to capitalize. You've likely heard this before, but the Bears in particular have been sweeping through APAC countries in popularity for eons. It's unprecedented popularity. I'm guessing it's part of why we're getting wee baby bears now. Moreover, the more pronounced slate that certain countries have in terms of localized content would likely help distribute the content better. If you're not airing Powerpuff Girls every second because other series are taking up space, it's gonna depreciate in interest at a much slower rate. While polishing this script, I found threads of Indian viewers lamenting the newer state of Cartoon Network and recalling a time when their feed wasn't dominated by their own local shows and instead just American cartoons. It's an interesting dynamic, but an understandable one to a degree, because the semiotics of adapting to growing markets is a marathon, not a sprint. There will always have to be extra changes or other decisions to roll with, but with investments like the Cartoon Network studio established in Abu Dhabi, from the numerous Indian agreements set up with local studios to the development deals established throughout Down Under, the region is likely in good hands, even if it doesn't always make the most agreeable choices. While the slate of content and sheer number of options may be overwhelming for some, it's evident that Cartoon Network in the Asia-Pacific region has really hit its stride. In contrast to the main US feed, which may seem like it's on autopilot due to its more select slate, the region is able to juggle so many shows for different audiences and still turn that passion for the IPs into really interesting experiences and such. It probably has the biggest selection in the world, but there's also a heavy imbalance as to which countries do deals and get work. In theory, it'd be an appealing feed to have if you're attached to Cartoon Network's Renaissance era. They don't air everything as often, but they still give those older properties their dues.
Cartoon Network Classics, available exclusively on Signal Pay-Per-View.
But in reciprocal, it's a very fluffy, bright, and colorful atmosphere that they've built up. Not exactly reminiscent of that old Check It era and its charms, but it'd be a personal choice. The final segment here has a pretty different way of throwing it back to the classics.
CartoonNetworkLA.com. Internet al estilo cartoon.
Quite honestly, I was saving Latin America for last because it's the main reason why I wanted to put this thing together. Obviously, there was enough content to sustain a few videos at least, but initially I found so much going on worth highlighting just south of me that I wanted to highlight this whole region and dish about the whole world's worth of content. I just figured adding the other sections would be more palatable. The sheer amount of info to categorize stopped this from being the encyclopedic guide I wanted it to be, but it'd be all worth it so long as I get to dish about how Cartoon Network serves it up down in the other Americas. Trust me, these guys have been ballin' long before the days of Villainous. And seeing these channels in action abroad basically convinced me of it. So, Cartoon Network Latin America was founded on April 30th, 1993, as a mere Spanish-speaking offshoot of the original Atlanta-based feed. Like many others, it started off as a humble pan-Latin feed to be hosted across country. Paring down the linguistic simplicity of the region, the feed was made available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese pretty early on. As one of the fastest growing brands in the region, it quickly branched off into its own specialized feeds with its own schedules by 1996. It was a major benefit to the lack of competition in its relevant arenas. Its contemporaries arrived on the scene years after Cartoon Network touched down, and local options were pretty lacking. Mexico and Argentina had a few picks and zazz along with Goblin and The Big Channel, respectively, but all three had fizzled out by the time Cartoon Network had gathered some serious momentum in the space. The 5 main feeds were split up geographically. Mexico and Brazil get their own, while the rest are split between North Atlantic, South Atlantic, and Pacific groupings. Most of them utilize the same programming and schedule, with the exception of Brazil's, which shares similarities with the others, but has its own wider roster of shows. In the beginning, they largely took inspiration from its originator as far as bumpers and programming went. Many of its bumpers were straight adaptations of the original American cuts. Other properties and shows exclusive to Latin American Cartoon Network may have also gotten fresh bumpers styled after the era the network was currently in. They were all well made for its time. By the 2000s, it had enough separate acquisitions and stylistic touches to start to differentiate itself. Its chronology is most extensively archived, as it is one of the oldest feeds around. Being the only youth or animation-related network that was available region-wide, its competition, again, was pretty slim. But that doesn't mean they weren't packing heat with its acquired content anyway. If not for the feed, where would kids go to get their fix of Gundam Wing, Pokemon, and Garfield? While the Pan-Latin feed was loyal to its humble roots, it became known for alternate programming, namely anime. Even without the presence of Toonami, it had always maintained viability on its main schedule, especially in the 2000s onward. Dragon Ball and Naruto were essentially treated like authentic cartoons at certain points. Toonami would launch in 2002, and with the success of Space Ghost, Adult Swim would launch later in 2005. While the former was founded upon the mission of being an all-ages destination, its demographic priorities later shifted to be more in line with its older predecessor. Similar specialty destinations would pop up over the course of the 2000s. Millennial additions to the grouping Boomerang experienced a rebrand in 2006 to appeal to children and a bit later, teens and young adults. Becoming increasingly centered around live action, many of these older properties found a home on Tooncast, a Latin American exclusive spot that served Boomerang's traditional function with an updated branding package. The subtle personalization throughout the decade did manage to change the vibe. Early into the new millennium, mainline Cartoon Network launched the ubiquitous Vote-a-Toon promotion, where the aforementioned vote determined what gets aired at certain times. Broad participation in the fully edited promos made this ship more cohesive than it should have been. The 2000s would also usher in more custom event blocks, such as the soccer-themed Kappa Cup, the classic Cartoon Pop, and the thematic Cine Cartoon. Blocks that expanded demographic ties, like the action-oriented Heroes and the mature destination Cartoon Off-Air, also made for the distinguished feed. By the time the end of the decade came, the bumpers got a similar amount of personalization to them. When the sun had set on the CN City to usher in the unorthodox nude era, the brand had taken in a rather unconventional direction that carried over into much wider success. Tunics were a branding era highly derivative of the nudes, but customized specifically for international regions, mainly the Latin American one. It took the music, the cues, the character animation, and the sole differences lied in the models. They're smaller, thinner, and much more blockheaded. That's literally it. Somehow they only had permission to run the nudes in the American branch, so they had to get a little creative. These guys became more mascots than their predecessors did. They were the face of any new specials and events. They got games and extensive coverage online. Today, they've even got their own series of shorts independent of the branding that brought them to life. You can find them around that Europe, Middle East, Africa region, but scarcely in LA itself. Going into the 2010s, they maintained a similar level of personality throughout and managed to launch even more great offshoots and events. It was often enough that the presentation had energy in Latin American feeds that could easily steal the spotlight of the main English language hub. Now, all throughout, we've been talking about localization at large, and how branches of Cartoon Network have learned how to adapt to their new audiences at home all around the world. In certain areas, the channel has been able to build brand recognition events like festivals and contests and bigger initiatives like commissioning content. Based on its long-standing history within parts of the world, I think it was uniquely poised to become cock of the walk, even if the region's animation industry had a storied history of its own. You see, Latin American animation had a wide history in its own right. It's not like every country's industry has been developed unilaterally, but the collective glut of content has been able to be self-sustainable. Films of all types, series of many influences, characters of many styles have had their day long before, again, Villainous stepped on the scene. And huge producers like Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina, they've managed to produce a whole lot of modern series, especially in collaboration with international producers. There's a few that you may or may not even know are from this part of the world. In a historical sense, it'd be difficult to ascribe a certain level of responsibility to Cartoon Network for this. You're still kind of living through this history now, and figuring out what the slate will be is still a prolonged process. At the very least, I can spit about what we already know. Many already know of Atlanta studio Primal Screen's work putting together the Cartoon Fridays branding, but the work of many other various eras remains unknown or obscure knowledge to this day. Based in Buenos Aires, Hookup Animation has been responsible for dozens upon dozens of CN-centric projects. From bumpers to shorts to PSAs and much more, they are basically the backbone of the channel's presentation. They had to go ahead to breathe life into a lot of really creative projects. They're as synonymous with their history as much as any cartoon. They're the most prominent of their partners, but they definitely weren't the only ones playing in the sandbox. Based in the same city, LaCube and Ronda Studios also got in on the action. The latter of which, known for having a softer and more bouncy style, put together more energized bumpers for Cartoon Network anything. Meanwhile, the former handled celebratory bumpers for the brand's 25th anniversary, along with some special materials for OKKO and branding for Tooncast. Studio Lobo from Sao Paulo were the main producers of the initial Toonix branding. Additional ads from the modern era were done by Primal and Artifact Design, the latter of which is also based in Atlanta. These ads help make for a strong brand identity, but the shows and series themselves solidified such a personalized touch for each Latin American feed. The Latin American sector wasn't the first to have their own original content, but personally I think they're the most tangible and personable. Since the branch still has a very tangible connection to the past of the network, they can draw inspiration from concepts and dynamics that worked way back when rather than just reinvent the wheel. Or decorate it. Whichever comes first. I'll have to speedrun these overviews again, but there's a lot more to learn about these shows, and they're worthy of a time sink outside of the little that I could say here. Not much else can be said, but it'd be downright criminal to not mention Mexican frontrunner for the channel, Villainous. Gaining ground as a series of shorts, the full series was put into production a few years ago. Its early success online is actually said to have prompted Cartoon Network Latin America to keep taking submissions for ideas through contests and events, an adventure most likely to pan out now more than ever. On the more down-to-earth side, we've got Oswaldo and Jarell's brother, both Brazilian entries. Watching them, I think they're more akin to Clarence than anything. Subdued but kind of worldly shows featuring unlikely protagonists exploring their wide prospects through very pedestrian means. Unexpectedly, we've also got another live-action series to throw into the ring, a co-produced Mexican teen drama named La CQ. As the title may suggest, the show is centered around a group of kids in school. Very cool. With 4 seasons and 100 episodes in the can, it had a relatively short lifespan of about 19 months. I've seen some suggestion among folks who discuss it that it was corny and not exactly evocative of real school life in Mexico, but who knows? It could have gotten capped, but it also could have concluded at the right time. As if it didn't get more absurd, Latin America even managed to get a hold of its own virtual influencer. An original idea from Brazilian Combo Studio lies Malu, a multi-platform series of content surrounding a young intrepid vlogger that can get down to the heart of the medium. On her own YouTube channel, she hosts her own talk show where she can quite literally draw from the best of the Warner library and really start to talk tunes. Check out this video my buddy D'Angelo made. It'll give you the skinny that better than I ever could. Well, it's not easy to identify, but thorough and apparent co-production. The branch also helped produce a couple of movies centered around a popular Argentinian comic, Paderuzu. The duo of movies functions as a group of prequels wherein the title characters age down and set on a few wild adventures. In more modern affairs, a Colombian original has touched down on the 7th, titled Waco vs. Paco, a series about two kids with no game trying to grapple for worldly fame through soccer. The jury's still out on this show. I mean, it literally just premiered probably the week this is coming out, but the network decided to adapt it and release it for Indian audiences as well, this time surrounding the game of cricket. There are likely pilots or series orders I haven't gotten by name. In fact, I know that at least during the last few years, they have been greenlighting pilots and shorts like lightning. But wherever they're set to premiere or close to the end of production, they will likely merit more of a footnote from me. There are so many creative voices resounding through this platform that will eventually go on to work on other projects for other studios and distributors around the Americas. And like I said, a fair amount of countries already have their own thriving industries and such. But the wild amount of outreach achieved is going to be a net positive for these systems and these creators. And this is the main reason why this is my favorite branch of Cartoon Network. Its simplicity in approach, but hearty enthusiasm for its mission, makes it an easy choice for me. At the end of the day, every region has its own perks and pluses, but I think this is truly a model operation. All the stars aligned to put it in its position, and while not immaculate, the people in charge of the brand know how to advance their standing and the prospects of the medium around them. Through their aggressive content strategy, personalized touch, and imaginative presentation, they're perhaps the main ones out there that manage to make this part of the globe not only part of its history, but animation history as well. And in a perfect world, that will continue to be the top slot taken up by the best place for cartoons. So not too long ago, my friend Kevin posted a video about the current state of Cartoon Network and where it seems to be going in terms of programming, scheduling, you know the rest. Spoiler alert, it wasn't very positive. But it was a positively excellent summation of the rocky road ahead for the brand based on their performance this year and the swirling implications of their new corporate overlords at AT&T. Oh, sorry, yep, I meant Discovery, throwing its weight around.
Reruns help a show grow. Hell, a lot of these shows, even the ones that wanted to be serialized, had to conform and sacrifice so many episodes to the episodic gods, only for them to not even be reran again in the first place. What's the point of putting them on streaming if they're not even made to be aired in a streaming format?
Now, knowing how deep into the Cartoon Network sauce a lot of animation fans are, I highly recommend giving it a watch because it really is the expose, corporate-to-consumer breakdown, and passionate vent that a lot of us have needed seeing recent decisions play out. To me, it resonated all the more knowing that said restructuring, in my interpretation, absolutely kneecapped Nickelodeon's animation production all throughout the 2010s. In any event, being the start of a brand new decade, we're all curious as to what turns the animation industry will take for the next 10 years or so. But for Cartoon Network to start off in the place that they have is troubling to say the least. And as it turns out, that video aged like fine wine just after Valentine's Day. You see, a few months ago, Warner Media divulged their plans for their new slate of content attributed to their youth sector, transforming Cartoon Network into a catch-all brand for anything and everything they can throw at the wall and hope it sticks. In contrast to the slight deficit of original content in favor of reboots, reimaginings, acquisitions, spin-offs, and other repurposings, they've employed a new slogan to fit the need. Not always cartoons, but always animated. The irony was seismic, to say the least. On Cartoon Network's main front, we've got a plethora of renewals, repackagings, and continuations announced. Only one series, Gross Girls, was announced to be a fully original IP coming to the channel. A few months from when this comes out, we'll have preschool, general audience, family-oriented, and adult animation all in one place. But perhaps disproportionately so. Much of the content carrying the torch will be made for a demographic that would have been thought to have been a no-go previously. Now this kind of jacked my shit for a few weeks. I mean, seeing all this play out was very baffling. Not only because of the new slate offered, but the swift train of support drummed up. I mean, for a channel with such a sense of synergy between its past and present in its original work, it was strange to see folks still appreciating events like Crossover Nexus embrace a big slate of expansions and a small list of original content. When the oldest of your original IPs is just over 3 years old, how are they going to build up enough capital to necessitate a spin-off anyway? I mean, Craig has a lot going for it, yeah, but, like, which new generation of kids are you trying to bring in with this preschool spin-off? The ones that are consuming the base series or the ones that would rather wait for the Paw Patrol movie to come out? You know, even if they seem like ill-advised ideas, I'm sure the folks left to pilot the projects will do well in their own right. They're talented and I know they believe in these ideas. But all the same, they deserve to have their original visions realized much more so. That's always been the channel's MO, right? Or right up to the Hanna-Barbera merge. Cartoon Network is not currently courting the lifeblood they need to survive, and the fact that the grown adults in its corner are not wise to the situation just seems cosmically tragic at best. This is all a reinterpretation, remember that. Now, to their credit, this wasn't an isolated content strategy. I mean, in fact, you could argue that Warner aped their plans from the other big two, who also snapped with very similar results. I'm not sure if I'd label Cartoon Network as my definitive favorite, but I think out of the big three, the legacy of original ideas is most pertinent to their success. It's difficult to keep in mind that we're in a bit of a transitionary period. Like, there's still a technological surge to keep track of, and now with the streaming wars in full swing, the reboot trend has been pushed even further into overdrive, and it's going to color how a lot of decisions are made in the next few years or so. It's hard to watch, but by the time everyone stops pumping the brakes, the destination will likely give us better prospects for the future. Now, obviously, there's a lot of new developments that have gone down in the last decade or so that have built up to this point. And while not fully indicative of the future, I'd hope to illuminate the network's capabilities beyond the original cartoons or the early Renaissance work. The big issue surrounding Cartoon Network is whether or not its content will shift into being soft, sweet, and safe, flying directly in the face of heavy hitters that were decidedly for older audiences, like Steven Universe Future, the Adventure Time miniseries, the Almighty Infinity Train books. The financial maelstrom AT&T is caught up in now would arguably make it feel like a necessity to scale back productions and make even fewer, safer products, and even with the advent of this merger with Discovery, it doesn't seem like that'll ease up. So to that end, I don't imagine the brand walking away without a scrape, but all the same, I don't think I can imagine a Cartoon Network without its edge either. There will always be a bit of a discrepancy between what the channel wants to achieve and what it should decidedly strive for. The past decade had arguably weathered its biggest identity shift ever and did so with flying colors. The last 5 years worth of content left in the previous decade is quite different atmospherically from the last 5. And while it does create the vibe of a different brand altogether, balance will have to be restored at some point. The nature of the merger and the burden of the pandemic almost certainly accelerated this cycle to a degree. Under normal circumstances, it would take a good 2 or 3 years for executive decisions to trickle down into the shows that we consume. If we really are spiraling into another dark age of content, then it'll make me anticipate the future ahead all the more. Without even breaking a sweat, the underdog of the big three is helping grow industries and make careers. The culture of Cartoon Network is much more celebratory than it once was. It was partially its enterprising spirit and rapid expansions that attracted its current corporate overlord to its blinding light. It's not going to make it out of this alone, surely, and who knows for how long it'll be stumbling in the dark. But somehow, I think it'll be okay. We'll all be okay, and by the end, the programming we're left with will actually propel us like they were exactly 10 years ago. Yeah, this stuff's looking kind of grim right now, but there's always good insight with this Maverick around. The only question is, are you seeing it?